My father said you wanted to have children, the Apache woman whispered through Caleb Mercer's doorway. Rain shone on her hair. Blood ran down one sleeve. Then she lifted her chin and finished. And I said, only with you. The words struck harder than the thunder rolling over Copper Run. Caleb still held the iron poker from the forge. Heat from the coals breathed at his back. Cold rain breathed in from the porch. Between the two stood the woman he knew only from market days and distant glances beside her father, Taza. He had spoken to her twice in his life. Once about a lame pony. Once about weather. Now she had arrived at midnight carrying a sentence big enough to start a war. Come inside, he said. She didn't move. Water dripped from the eaves in silver threads. His mare stamped in the stable. Far off, a dog barked twice, then stopped. If I step in, she said, your life changes with mine. Caleb almost shut the door. Taza was respected by his own people and distrusted by most white men, which usually meant he understood the valley better than either side wished. If his daughter was on Caleb's porch bleeding, trouble was already bigger than gossip. Trouble had boots, rifles, and orders. Get in before someone sees you, Caleb said. She crossed the threshold. The room filled with wet sage, horse sweat, and the copper smell of blood. Caleb barred the door and raised the lamp. Light caught the knife at her belt, the torn shoulder of her buckskin dress, and the hard calm in her eyes. Fear lived in them. Yes, but not helplessness. Who did that, he asked. Men who served Silas Creed. Her voice stayed low. My brother tried to stop them. I do not know if he is alive. Creed. Cattle king. Water thief. Smiling church donor. Caleb's jaw tightened. The woman drew a silver concho from inside her blanket and dropped it into his hand. A crescent moon was stamped at its center. Taza's mark. My father said if I reached you, I was to show you this and speak those words exactly. Those words make it sound like I asked for you. I know. I didn't. I know that too. He stared at her. Then why say them? She pulled out a folded strip of oilcloth. Inside was a rough charcoal map of the valley, the North Spring, the canyon wash, and a square marked beside the words buried books. Under the map, in Taza's English, Caleb read. He stole the names of the dead. Before he could ask another question, hoofbeats splashed past the smithy. Several riders. Slow now. Searching. The woman went still. Caleb pinched the lamp lower. Voices drifted outside. Check the barn. Creed said she cannot leave the valley. A fist hammered against the porch post. Caleb reached for the rifle over the mantel. The walnut stock slid into his palm like an old grudge. He motioned her toward the back room. She shook her head. If they see only you, they search. If they see us together, the lie becomes useful. That landed hard, because he understood at once. Taza had not sent his daughter here for safety alone. He had sent her to create a scandal so loud Creed could not smother it quietly. A white blacksmith and an Apache woman under one roof at midnight would drag every eye in Copper Run toward the one thing Creed feared: attention. Another knock came, louder. Caleb worked the rifle lever and set his mouth. Then stand where they can see you, he said. She stepped beside him. The lamp burnished the rain on her skin. For one brief second, he saw something in her face that unsettled him more than the riders outside. Trust. Dangerous, undeserved trust. He opened the door. Deputy Knoll shoved against it with muddy boots and whiskey breath. Two ranch hands crowded behind him under dripping hats. Their horses steamed in the rain. Knoll's little eyes jumped from Caleb to the woman and widened with mean delight. Well now, town says Taza's daughter ran from the mission. Town also says Silas Creed offered a reward for her return. Looks to me like you've complicated both matters. Caleb planted himself in the doorway. Looks to me like you're ruining my porch. Knoll grinned. Bring her out, and we'll call it confusion. Keep hiding her, and we'll call it abduction." Before Caleb could answer, the woman spoke. "Tell Creed he is late," she said. The porch went still. Noel blinked. Late for what? She slipped her hand into Caleb's, cold and deliberate. "My father made his bargain," she said. "I made mine." One of the ranch hands crossed himself. Noel's grin faltered. Gossip was one thing. Claim was another. In a valley built on ownership, her words sounded like fire dropped in dry grass. Caleb felt her fingers tighten around his own. He did not know her name. He did not know why Taza had chosen him. He only knew the night had already crossed a line that could not be walked back. Then a rifle cracked from the darkness beyond the rain, and the porch post beside Caleb's head burst apart in a spray of splinters. And beyond the storm, trouble smiled and loaded. Caleb slammed the door and dragged her down as a second shot shattered the lamp chimney. Glass burst across the floor. Darkness swallowed the room except for the red forge glow. "Back room," he said. This time she obeyed. They crouched behind the flower chest while bullets thudded into the walls. Rufus, Caleb's hound, erupted in furious barking from under the table. Caleb lifted one shutter slat with the rifle barrel and counted shadows in the rain. 3 men on the porch, one by the stable, another at the cottonwood. Too neat for a drunken search. Creed had sent killers with the witnesses. The woman tore a strip from her blanket and bound her shoulder tighter. Blood still seeped through. She made no sound. "My name is Nizhoni," she whispered. "Caleb," a voice boomed from the porch. "Mercer, bring her out, and you'll keep your forge. Hide her, and you lose it." Nizhoni's eyes flicked to the coal chute behind the anvil. Caleb saw the thought happen before she said it. There is another exit. A crawl space into the wash. Hard going. Then we use it. He hesitated. If he sent her through alone and stayed, maybe he could save the shop, the grave behind the cottonwoods, the bare shape of the life he'd held together since his wife and newborn son had died in the same August week. If he went with her, he chose ruin in the open. Outside, men pounded on the stable doors. Rufus barked harder. Nizhoni watched him with infuriating clarity. "My father said you hesitate when every choice harms someone. He said tonight would give you no clean path." Caleb hated how well Taza had read him. Another shot split the window frame. Then came a yelp outside. Rufus cut short. Something in Caleb hardened. He fired through the shutter and heard a man drop in the mud. "Choice made," he said. He snatched up cartridges, jerky, bandages, the map, and a small tin box of keepsakes he had never once let out of reach. Nizhoni took the second revolver without asking permission, which steadied him more than pleading would have. Together they dropped into the coal chute and crawled through soot, heat, and choking dust while the front door burst inward behind them. By the time boots thundered over the floorboards, Caleb and Nizhoni were sliding into the wash under the rear wall. Rain hit like thrown gravel. Caleb whistled once. His mare and pack mule came from the lean-to, half wild with fear. He boosted Nizhoni onto the mare and swung up behind her. Then flames licked across the smithy roof. Caleb reined hard. Sparks flew into the storm. The shop he had built with his own hands glowed orange through the rain. "My dog was in there," he said. Nizhoni grabbed his wrist. "If you go back now, you die for wood." "Right. Live angry. It is more useful." So he rode. They pushed north through flooded washes until dawn broke silver over the sage. Caleb's clothes dried stiff with soot. Nizhoni sat rigid in front of him, one hand pressed to her wounded shoulder, but she never asked to stop. At an abandoned line shack above Dry Hollow, Caleb finally dismounted and brought her inside. Sun slid through wall cracks and thin knives. The place smelled of mice and old pine. He cleaned the wound while she bit down on a strap. The bullet had only grazed her. "Lucky." "Why me?" he asked at last. "Why did your father trust me?" She looked out the window before answering. 3 years ago, you shot a reservation pony the soldiers had ridden lame. You took no money. My father said a man shows himself fastest when the broken thing cannot repay him. Caleb tied the bandage. He had forgotten that day. Taza hadn't. Around noon, a peddler rode the ridge and shouted down the latest rumor. Copper Run was boiling. Caleb Mercer had stolen Taza's daughter. Taza himself was missing. Silas Creed had sworn to drag both offenders back before tomorrow's sunset. When the rider moved on, Nizhoni laid the silver concho and the map on the table. The books at the North Spring are ledgers, she said. My father stole them from Creed's bookkeeper. They prove Creed bought dead Apache children's allotments through false guardians and forged names. He used the land claims to seize the spring. Caleb stared. Water meant cattle. Cattle meant judges. Judges meant men like Creed smiled and called theft business. If those ledgers reach Benson, Creed can be broken, Nizhoni said. But only if we also find papers from the agency's strongbox in town. My father said the ledgers tell what was stolen. The strongbox proves who helped steal it. Caleb let out a slow breath. The valley had already chosen its lie. Now he had to decide whether to protect what he had left or burn the lie down in daylight. He looked at the tin box on the table, at the map, at the woman who had carried scandal to his door like a lit match. Outside, 3 riders appeared on the far ridge and stopped to study the shack. Nizhoni reached for the revolver. Caleb reached for the rifle. Sundown tomorrow, he said. Creed wants a public ending. Her dark eyes met his. Then we speak first. They left the shack before the riders could descend, cutting west through stone country where tracks vanished easily. By afternoon, they reached Split Tooth Canyon, a red wound in the hills where the air smelled of creosote and old water. Nizhoni dismounted beside a wall of black stone and brushed gravel from a narrow crevice. A rawhide strip appeared. She pulled. A canvas bundle slid free. Inside lay 2 oilskin-wrapped ledgers, a brass key, and a faded photograph of Apache children beside a government wagon. On the back, careful English names had been written, for names were marked deceased. Beside each, another hand had later added acreage and transfer prices. Caleb felt the heat go cold inside him. Creed sold the dead, Nizhoni said. Her thumb rested on one little face in the photograph. My cousin is here. She died at the school. He filed a claim under a guardian who never lived. Caleb tucked one ledger under his shirt and handed her the other. Then we ride straight to Benson. No, she held up the brass key. The key opens the agency's strongbox. Without those papers, men will say these ledgers are forgeries made by angry Indians and a blacksmith with a stolen woman. He hated that she was right. A hawk screamed above them. Then came another sound. Tack against stone. Caleb shoved her behind a boulder as shots cracked from the rim. Rock chips sprayed over them. One bullet sliced the mule's lead rope. The animal bolted with the bedrolls. How many? She whispered. Caleb peered through a notch. 4 above, 2 below. Then came the calm voice he knew from cattle auctions and church picnics. Mercer, Silas Creed called from the rim. Send the girl up and I'll leave you the horse. Creed sat above them in a black hat with his silver-mounted rifle across his saddle. Deputy Knoll waited at the canyon mouth with a shotgun. Boxed in. Nizhoni's face went still. My father, Creed smiled. Alive at sunrise. After that, his usefulness diminished. The words hung in the canyon like smoke. For a moment, neither of them fired. Wind worried the sage along the rim. Dust slid in thin streams from under Creed's horse, and somewhere below, water tapped against stone with a sound that made the killing above it feel crueler. Caleb remembered Taza standing at his forge one evening, warming scarred hands over the coals while saying that land never belonged to the loudest man, only to the ones willing to guard it for children unborn. Hearing Creed boast over the dead, Caleb understood that this canyon had become a grave unless somebody made it testify. Caleb's grip tightened on the rifle until the wood bit his palm. Shooting from below might work, but one miss would kill them both. Nizhoni leaned close. There is a chimney crack behind us. It climbs to the rim and leaves you here. It leaves one of us moving. Another shot slammed the rock. Dust filled Caleb's mouth. He understood the choice with brutal clarity. Stay together and be overrun. Climb alone and maybe save the evidence, but abandon her. Surrender and bury every dead child a second time. Nizhoni solved it before he could. She tore a scrap from the photograph backing, scribbled a name on it with Caleb's carpenter pencil, and shoved it into his hand. If I fall, take the books to Father Esteban at St. Jude's. He owes my father a life debt. No. Listen. I am done with plans that save justice by burying you. For the first time, anger flashed across her face. Then move faster. She rose from cover and fired twice toward the canyon mouth. Deputy Noel dove aside. Creed's horse reared. In that confusion, she shoved Caleb toward the chimney crack. He caught her around the waist instead and dragged her down just as shotgun pellets shredded the air where she had stood. For one stunned instant they were pressed together, dust and blood and breath. Next time, Caleb said, warn me before you become a hero. Next time, learn to obey. He almost laughed. Instead, he backed them toward the crack, firing upward in steady rhythm. Stone screamed. Sun flashed off rifle barrels. They climbed sideways through the narrow wound, Caleb first, hauling with elbows and knees, then reaching back whenever Nizhoni's injured shoulder slipped. Creed leaned over the rim and thrust his rifle into the gap. Caleb fired blind. A grunt answered. The rifle vanished. They spilled onto the rim into hard sunlight. Creed stood 10 paces away, forearm bleeding. A ranch hand swung his revolver toward Caleb. Nizhoni fired first. The man's hat spun away, and he dropped, stunned. Creed lunged for her. Caleb hit him low. They crashed through sage and dust. Creed fought mean, driving ringed fists into Caleb's brow and ribs. Blood filled Caleb's eye. You think she chose you? Creed hissed. She used you. The line at your door was bait for a lonely fool. The words landed because Caleb had feared them. Then Deputy Noel climbed the rim behind Nizhoni and leveled the shotgun at her back. Caleb shouted, but the warning came too late. The blast threw Nizhoni against a twisted juniper at the edge. The ledger flew from her hands and dropped onto a pale stone shelf below the cliff. Caleb did not remember crossing the ground. One heartbeat Creed's boot was in his ribs, and the next Caleb had slammed Deputy Noel into the brush. The shotgun fired wild. Caleb drove his forehead into the deputy's face until the man went limp. When Caleb looked up, Creed was running for the switchback trail to town. He nearly chased him. Then Nizhoni made a sound behind him, small and choked. She had not gone over the edge. The blast had hurled her into a juniper trunk. One arm hung through the branches. Below, the ledger fluttered on a rock shelf in the updraft like a trapped bird. Can you breathe? Caleb asked, dropping beside her. She nodded, eyes squeezed shut. Can you stand? If pride is enough. Even then she found the nerve to make him snort once through blood and fear. He cut back the torn buckskin. Pellet graze. Bruising. No mortal wound. Creed's hoofbeats faded down the trail. You should follow him, Nizhoni said. No. He will reach town first. And if I chase him, who keeps you alive? She met his gaze, fierce even through pain. I did not say I was the easier choice. He looked at the ledger below, then at her, and stripped the rope from his saddle. I am getting both of you, he said. He climbed down the cliff, rope burning his palms, and hauled the ledger back up shaking. By the time he reached the rim again, Nizhoni was sitting upright with a revolver across her lap, keeping watch despite the tremor in her hand. They hid by dusk in a lava tube Caleb had found as a boy. Inside, the air smelled of cool dust and damp stone. Water ticked somewhere in the dark. He built a shielded fire, brewed bitter coffee, and cleaned her wounds again. Silence settled around them, not empty, only careful. At last Nizhoni opened a pouch and spilled 3 things into her palm. A broken turquoise bracelet, 3 mesquite seeds, and a tiny carved wooden horse. "My brother made this when he was 12, she said of the horse. He believed anything with 4 legs could outrun sorrow. They took him to the boarding school instead. He came back with a cough, English prayers, and anger he had no place to put." Caleb touched the broken bracelet. "Your mother's?" She nodded. "It snapped when soldiers searched our camp. She told me never mend a break too neatly. If you hide where something cracked, you begin lying to yourself." The words opened something in him. He placed his own tin box between them and unwrapped the blue cloth. A gold ring, tiny knitted booties, a lock of pale hair. "My wife was Ellen," he said. Firelight turned the ring into a small sun. She died giving birth. The baby died before sunset. Folks kept telling me God had another plan. I wanted to hit every one of them with a shovel. So I learned to keep my promises small enough to survive. Nizhoni listened without flinching. "You buried your house inside your chest," she said. He gave a humorless smile. "That sounds uglier than it felt at the time." Truth often does. She leaned back against the cave wall and closed her eyes for a moment. The fire touched one cheek with copper light and left the other in shadow, and Caleb understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear decide the shape of a life. He had spent years calling that refusal foolish whenever it looked too much like hope. Wind scraped over the cave mouth. Coyotes called from the flats. Caleb turned the tiny booties in his hands. "When you spoke at my door, you thought it was only a trap, was it?" For the first time, uncertainty touched her voice. "My father told me to use those words because men like Creed understand possession better than justice. He said scandal would make them stupid. He was right." She paused. "But the second part was mine. Only with you. He did not give me that." Caleb looked up slowly. "Why?" Her thumb moved over the broken bracelet. "Because you were the first man I saw get angry for suffering that could give him nothing. Because my father trusted your conscience. Because I was tired of being traded inside everyone's plans except my own." Her eyes held his. "And because if I ever chose a father for my children, I would want a man who knows broken things are not shameful." The cave seemed to draw a deeper breath. Caleb reached for the bracelet. "May I?" From an old trap spring near the wall, he took a length of wire and mended the bracelet with a visible silver seam, not hiding the break. When he fastened it around her wrist, his fingers lingered. "Scars mean it lived," he said. A small smile touched her mouth. "Mercy is not obedience." "No." "And love is not purchase." "No," he said again more quietly. Hoofbeats echoed faintly outside the lava field. Both of them went still. Lantern light bobbed far below. "Searchers." Nizhoni reached through the dark and took his hand, not for comfort, but for promise. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "we stop running." Caleb closed his fingers around hers. "Tomorrow we finish it together." They rode before dawn through fog pooled in the washes and left the horses in the cottonwoods south of Copper Run. St. Jude's Chapel stood behind the town. Father Esteban opened the side door before Caleb knocked twice. He looked at their wounds, the ledgers, and the key. "Your father always did choose trouble better than peace. Come in." Inside, the chapel smelled of wax and dust. Nizhoni laid the ledgers on a narrow table. Esteban nodded. "The clerk drinks early and lies late. We can manage him. One mercy first. Your hound lived." A stable boy pulled him from the smithy before the roof fell. They split for an hour. Esteban and Nizhoni slipped toward the agency office. Caleb crossed to the stable and found Rufus singed, limping, and furious enough for 3 healthy dogs. By 8:30 the square was crowded. Ranch hands lined the rails. At the fountain, Silas Creed sat his black gelding like a man born to ownership. Deputy Knoll stood nearby, face purpled by Caleb's last answer. Creed smiled when Caleb stepped into the square with Rufus at heel. "Mercer, where's the girl?" "Safe from you," Caleb said. Creed spread his hands. "I offered lawful protection to a frightened woman after her father vanished. You answered with theft, assault, and kidnapping. Private theft documented in ledgers, you mean." The chapel bell rang once. Heads turned. Nizhoni stepped into the square beside Father Esteban, bandaged but straight-backed, carrying a packet of papers tied with red twine. Beside her shuffled agency clerk Walter Pritchard, pale and sweating, with 3 Apache elders behind him. Nizhoni's voice carried hard and clear. "My father was murdered for these. False guardianship papers. False transfers. Dead Apache children turned into land claims and water rights under Silas Creed's orders." Pritchard broke immediately. "He made me sign them," the clerk blurted. "He said no court would care if the children were already dead." Shouts burst across the square. Creed wheeled toward the clerk, hand dropping for his pistol. Caleb seized the bridle and yanked hard. Rufus lunged at the gelding's foreleg. The horse jerked sideways. Creed fired. The bullet shattered the fountain lip. Deputy Knoll rushed Caleb with a club. Caleb met him with the shotgun stock across the ribs and tore the pistol from his belt. Creed came off the saddle knife first. They hit the dust hard while townsfolk scattered. "Drop it." Marshal Owen Briggs rode in from the North Road with 2 county men behind him, summoned before dawn by Esteban's messenger. Creed ignored him and drove the knife toward Caleb's throat. Caleb trapped the wrist. Steel kissed the skin beneath his jaw. In that instant, the final choice stood clean before him. He could kill Creed and satisfy every dark thing grief had sharpened in him. Or he could keep the man alive and force the valley to hear the truth in open court. Caleb slammed his forehead into Creed's nose. Bone cracked. The knife loosened. He could have driven it into Creed's ribs. Instead, he flung it away and pinned Creed empty-handed until Briggs and the county men snapped irons on him. "No," Caleb said through his rage as Creed spat beneath him. "You answer alive." Nizhoni stepped forward. The crowd opened for her without being asked. She knelt in the dust, so Creed had to look up at the daughter of the man he thought buried with his secrets. "You sold our dead," she said. "Now you will hear their names in court until your own becomes smaller than all of them." By noon, searchers found Taza and Nizhoni's brother near the old lime kiln, murdered and poorly hidden. Grief fell over victory like black cloth. Caleb stood with Nizhoni as they were carried home, offering no easy words, only his steady presence. 3 weeks later, Creed was taken in chains to Benson. Pritchard followed him, and the spring rites were frozen pending review. Copper Run gathered beneath the cottonwoods for burial. Caleb stood beside Nizhoni, hat in both hands, Rufus leaning against his leg. When the last prayer ended, she pressed Taza's silver concho into Caleb's palm. "He chose well," she said. Caleb closed her fingers back over it. "So did you." That autumn they rebuilt the forge wider than before, with a water trough any traveler could use. Nizhoni kept the books. Caleb hammered iron. Children drifted there after chores because Rufus tolerated sticky hands, and Nizhoni taught letters beside the open doors. In spring, Caleb asked her properly, before witnesses, with no storm and no bargain. "I cannot promise easy," he said. Her bracelet flashed where the silver seam caught sunlight. "Good," she answered. I did not ride through gunfire for easy. They married under a beam Caleb carved with 2 names and 1 crescent moon. Years later, their daughter raced between anvil and trough while her brother laughed, and travelers still asked if the story was true. Caleb always answered the same way. Silver can buy silence, he would say, looking toward the woman who taught him to live forward. But love must be chosen. And at sunset, when the forge doors stood open and their children chased sparks like fireflies across the yard, the last light caught the silver seam in Nizhoni's bracelet and carried it shining toward the wide, forgiven horizon.